Welcome everyone to the Senate Press and Media Availability. Welcome to those who are viewing this over the internet and whatever other means we have technology-wise. We welcome everyone, and we welcome questions and dialogue on issues that we're facing as a legislature, and maybe issues that we haven't thought about yet. So first, I've invited Senator Thatcher to come in. Senator Thatcher's been at the center, at least in the Senate, on issues facing mental illness and suicide, and passed 2 bills out of the Senate today. But also would like him to briefly describe some of the broader, these bills in context with the broader objectives of the legislature. We have Senator Adams here, who is on a kind of a blue ribbon commission that the governor's put together. This is, I think, one of the bigger issues that we may be facing during this session and maybe a session to come, trying to figure out what we can do in creating public policy that will save people's lives and help reduce suicide rates. Senator Thatcher.
Thank you. Over the past 5 years, I've run several bills that dealt with mental and behavioral health and with suicide prevention efforts. And they've all kind of stemmed from the same question. If your house is on fire, you know where to get help. If you need a police officer, you know where to get help. But what do you do if you're struggling with thoughts of suicide or depression, or if a family member is having a mental health issue? And unfortunately, most citizens have absolutely no idea where to get help. So that is where my initial effort to get a 3-digit number came from. When that was blocked, we turned to the Safe UT app, which is great for kids in schools and has had tremendous success, and that commission continues to function. But we still have the larger issue of what do you do for everyone else? What do you do for people who don't have smartphones? So you heard today from Congressman Stewart that there is a national effort. It's passed the Senate. It's working on the House that will deliver to us as states a nationwide 3-digit crisis intervention number. Well, the state of Utah is going to have this unique position where we're going to be able to put that infrastructure in place before that 3-digit number is even available. By advertising a single statewide number, we can solve the problem of not having these services available outside of Salt Lake County. And we've got 4 bills that address that. Do you want to break this up, or do you want me to just keep rolling?
Just keep rolling.
Okay.
You're on a roll.
So we had a commission that we created last year that brought together mental health authorities from around the state, along with people like Doug Thomas, who is the Director of Substance Abuse and Mental Health, like people like Ross Van Vranken, who runs UNI, which is absolutely the finest mental health facility in the state of Utah. The challenge is funding. So if we are going to start advertising one singular number statewide, so that instead of what happens in 28 counties, which is either going to police dispatch, which is not the best place to send a crisis call, or a mental health crisis call, they're great for everything else, or going to voicemail, as about half of our counties do, which sadly we know firsthand has cost us far too many of our kids. For us to send all these calls up to UNI, first we're going to trip Pete Knudsen.
I'm so sorry.
She did that on purpose. She said at the very beginning, I think somebody has it on camera, she was going to try and trip you. If we're going to be sending all these calls up to UNI, then UNI's going to have to hire more therapists. They're going to have to hire more people, and the price tag is going to be roughly $2.3 million. And unfortunately, even though that recommendation came through our commission in September and passed legislative committees, unfortunately it didn't make it into any kind of budget recommendations, and it's something that is going to be a really difficult battle, and it's something that we as the legislature and hopefully the Senate can help prioritize. Because if we don't have those therapists answering the phones, then we can't tell people to call UNI without putting them out of business. The next thing we did today was we have directed the Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health to develop a new type of first responder that is completely unprecedented. Yes, there are some police officers who have a little bit of limited mental health training. Yes, we have EMTs with some limited training. There's a couple of places that will actually send out an LCSW, which is fantastic, but a licensed clinical social worker is a master's level degree, and we don't have enough in the state, and so we can't really be sending them to every crisis. So this new bill directs that Doug Thomas with Substance Abuse and Mental Health will develop a new type of first responder that is specifically trained in mental and behavioral health. It's the first of its kind that I can find anywhere in the nation.
So let's take questions from the media or from anybody online.
So, how come there's no sort of penalty, I guess, or anything if a suicide hotline goes to voicemail? I mean, that seems really disturbing.
Well, it is. And so I'll tell you, I think the state deserves some blame for that. Because what we did essentially was we set a standard that says every county has to have a 24/7 number. We required that, but we never followed up. We never gave them resources to do it. We never set standards, and so we just told them, you need a 24/7 number that people can call. Well, people can call the 24/7 number. And the way that it works in most counties is, during business hours, there's a receptionist. Well, the problem is, you don't... What if you've got somebody who's just been sexually assaulted and they're calling for mental health support? Do you really want them to have to tell their story to a receptionist who decides whether or not they deserve to bother the counselor, right? But after hours is where it gets really scary, because after hours, most of our counties roll it to a 911 dispatcher. Well, a 911 dispatcher is great at saying, 911, what's your emergency? Well, if you're in a heightened state, if you are in a crisis, you may or may not be able to speak at that moment, right? And so we can't really have our 911 dispatchers trained to be therapists without interfering with their primary function, which is to get a first responder on the road and rolling as quickly as possible. So even worse are the counties that go to voicemail. And I can tell you a personal story of a dear friend whose daughter, after attempting suicide, she took her phone and she programmed in the 24-hour number for her county. And she made her daughter swear that she would call that number if she was ever in trouble and didn't feel like she could talk to mom. So after the coroners had left with this girl's body, her mom went in and checked the phone. And she had called for help. And the call went to voicemail. So unfortunately, we know for a fact that we are losing people. And I can only guess as to what the numbers are, but if it's someone that you know and love, one is too many. So I know $2.3 million is a lot of money to ask, but I'm really hoping that we can get there.
Further questions for Senator Thatcher?
You guys gonna be able to fund this?
This is a year to fund important issues like this because we have quite a bit of new money, so I think it has a good chance.
Appreciate the media's attention on this. I think it goes even beyond treatment. I think it affects everyone. And I think as the public becomes more aware, how we treat one another and what we do with one another, I think becomes part of that effort. And I think as we recognize when individuals are in crisis that we can, even besides therapists, there are good people around that can help. Awareness is part of that.
But you know, you hit on,
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you hit on something. If there's one thing that I wish that I could get out to every single person, it's this. You, as an individual, can make a difference on this issue. When you ask somebody, how are you doing? Most of the time it's a greeting, right? But if you actually take a minute to care about the answer, if they know that when you say, "Are you okay?" that you actually care, part of what leads to suicide is a lack of connection. If you feel isolated, if you feel alone, if you do not feel like you have a tribe, that is when you slip into those moments of despair where you think you'll never get out. Now, those windows are roughly 15 minutes long. The typical suicide attempt happens within 15 minutes of the decision. So if you can get through the 15-minute window, then they live.
Questions on other issues?
I wanted to follow up, Senator
Oh.
Thatcher. Why did you think there was so much concern about the additional licensure your bill today would require?
Because of misunderstanding. I think it was a simple misunderstanding. One of the things that we discussed in great detail was if we turn around and say you need this licensure to be able to provide these emergency services, what about people that are doing it now? There are people that are doing it now. And so we don't want to in any way, shape, or form interfere with anything that is currently working. We just think that there's a better way to do it. And so, for example, you'll notice that there's an exemption for a Good Samaritan. Well, if you're walking down the street and you see somebody standing on a bridge about to jump, if you run up and try and intervene, we certainly don't want you to be punished for practicing without a license, right? And so that's why there are so many exemptions. But as far as not having a licensure for this, would you want paramedics that didn't have to prove competency? That didn't have to prove their education or qualifications? I think it was just misunderstanding.
Why do you think mental health is treated differently than something more concrete that like a physician would deal with, or a fireman or a policeman, right?
Well, you just said it. It's the difference between concrete and ethereal, right? How do you prove that? I can't tell you how often I will talk to people who are angry with those who have committed suicide, right? They were selfish. They were stupid. They were mean. They were awful. And I went through something very similar when I was 15. And you have to understand that sometimes it's not a decision. Sometimes it's not a choice. Sometimes it is an illness. Sometimes it is a sickness that kills people. You think about the culture in the state of Utah, and when you hear that a neighbor has a cancer diagnosis, you bring him a casserole. You hear that a neighbor has a depression or a mental health diagnosis, and you gossip. And I wish it weren't true, but I think you know that it is. And until we can change that culture, until we can help break through some of that stigma, there are going to be people who are afraid to ask for help. But the other thing that helps people open up and share and be honest is when they know that they're not the only one. Most people that feel this level of depression and this level of upset, most of these people withdraw into themselves because they think they're the only ones that have ever felt that way. And so when someone steps out and says, I struggle with depression, I struggle with thoughts of suicide, I'm struggling to get through day to day, that you tell that other person that it's okay for them to not be okay too. And we'll be okay by not being okay together.
And this highlights some of the difficulties we've been dealing with the homeless issue.
Yes.
If it was, I'm homeless because I've broken my leg, if it was I'm homeless because of some other physical problem, this would be much easier
Yes.
to deal with. The dynamics that we've been facing with the homeless, but because mental illness is pervasive in our homeless population, because it's hard to pinpoint, it's hard to put your thumb on, it makes it very, very difficult. And getting competent treatment is paramount in getting anywhere in solving the homeless issues to any kind of degree. So it's the mental illness that is showing its head in all kinds of public policies that we're dealing with today.
I think you have to remember also that mental illness and all of that, there's a or not a subcategory, but something we say also, which is behavioral health. And if a person's not behaving the way we believe they should, then we don't react. Our reaction is usually negative in that way. And these are people that are acting out. Suicide's the same thing. People are reacting and doing things that we kind of shun away from, rather than to look at the problem that they're facing. And that's a societal thing over time that we've done. I know in Australia, they actually have emergency, it's an emergency thing where you see somebody on the street, common person, and it's an intervention program. The people are actually trained in Australia to really look out for one another. And when they see those behavioral problems, they know there's a problem. And it's one of those things we need to learn to deal with. We take a look at the homeless, I think as the president just indicated, that's part of our big problem. Part of alcohol and drug abuse is part of that self-medication thing for a mental illness. And we need to address those issues. And suicide, unfortunately, is the ultimate end to a person who is struggling with a mental illness.
If anybody ought to be able to look after one another, we ought to be able to do that in Utah.
And Senator Thatcher, I think, highlights the misunderstanding.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, we think that this is more of a choice,
Right.
but many who are dealing with mental illness, it isn't. It's real. It isn't a choice. Now, substance abuse can make that more difficult to deal with, but many are dealing with depression, all kinds of different mental disabilities, and they're not doing it by choice.
Well, and there's this synergy between the two, where if you have untreated mental health issues and you're struggling and you're having a hard time, you will often turn to self-medication. And so mental illness and substance abuse go hand in hand, but it also goes the other way. When you get involved in substance abuse issues, when you start using and become addicted to these substances, that can lead to depression, that can lead to thoughts of suicide, that can lead to mental illness. And so we really solve the problems together when we get the right people providing care.
Big issue, big challenge, Senator Okerlund.
I talked to my mental health authority boards throughout my district. JRI is helping on mental health issues. Where we were putting people in jail because they had some behavioral problems. And we ended up putting them in jail rather than getting them treatment, just because that's the place we had for them. And we'd take them to jail and they'd be evaluated, and then they'd have some minor crime, they'd be turned back out again. JRI has allowed us to be able to be more responsive to those kinds of people. We're getting mental health treatment now for people who weren't getting it before. Part of what happens as a result of that is we're short of beds because we're treating more people, the homeless and others, and it's a statewide problem. So we're going to have to address that issue. We're going to have to make sure that we get more beds available for a place to put people who really are mentally unstable and need help.
And it'll be interesting to see as we did the Medicaid expansion, got our waiver. A lot of that funding was directed at this population, and hopefully there'll be additional money, and we'll see how that rolls out to see how that helps with the funding.
Well,
We've run out of time, and
I was just going to say, there's one other bill that may help with this effort where Medicaid will cover hospitalization, but they won't cover intervention, even though intervention is pennies to the dollar.
Yeah.
And so one of the bills that we're running that Steve Ellison has over in the House is to ask for a Medicaid waiver that basically says, look, we will save you millions if you will just pay for these intervention teams. So hopefully we get that waiver.
Thank you, everyone, for being involved today. We kind of focused on the issue of suicide and mental illness. So we'll see what comes up tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate you being here.
Take over.
Thank you for being here.
Good to have you here.
Hey, you're pretty good with the last.
I know.